Hey team, how are we? I hope you guys have enjoyed your stress-free day. I know a lot of you guys had reached out about connecting with classmates, so I hope that turned out into something actually kind of fun and enjoyable, even though it was an assignment. I wanted to run through the PowerPoint because we won't have time, obviously, to get through the full chapter in one day. And next week, you guys have another day off going into the Easter holiday. So we're just kind of having to zip through some of this stuff. So I wanted to at least be able to articulate and talk through some of this as you guys are going through this chapter. I know sometimes it's hard to just read the content, and having a little bit of voiceover and such might help you guys. So stress, we're going to look at the definition of stress, of course, what it is, how we react to it, describe how stress can actually exacerbate or lead to various diseases, illnesses, body breakdown, just all of the other systems that can get affected by acute, which means like short-term stress, just a situation that you're dealing with, and then obviously chronic stress that is just long-term and constant that can really add up for us. What are our common sources of stress, specifically for you guys in your college years and your age right now, what you guys are dealing with, and then some techniques for preventing and managing stress. And as always, the chapter then kind of helps you put a plan together. Like, what are some things, some tangible takeaways that you can use to manage and overcome any of the things that you guys are dealing with on a daily basis? And it's a pretty nice, exhaustive list. So hopefully, if there is something you're dealing with, we touch on it at some level, although there are certain things I'm sure you guys are dealing with that may not specifically come up. If you do want to ever talk through that, please reach out. We can do just an individual meeting or grab coffee, or you guys have the counseling center too, if that's more comfortable. So the stressor is kind of the root of the stress response. Like, what's the situation, environment, relationship, physical, psychological, emotional? What's the event that actually triggers the response? That's the stressor. The stress response is then the symptoms that result from that. So again, physical, psychological, or emotional, what's the reaction? So for example, I have a test coming up. The test is the stressor. That's the event that's causing maybe the physical and emotional response, upset stomach, anxiety, beating heart, all those things. That's the stressor, is the test. The response is the raised heart rate, the disrupted sleep, the anxiety. That's the response to the event. And stress itself mostly gets a negative connotation, although we will talk about some positive sources of stress. And then that leads to the physical, psychological, emotional experience that accompanies it. So the stress is kind of all the stressor and the response all together is considered stress. We break the stress symptoms or the stress response down into four main categories. So you can have physical response to stress. I mentioned a couple of those, but others would be like dry mouth. I know when I'm speaking in front of a group of people, I mean, not you guys, because you love me and I'm comfortable, but if I'm in like a big event, like I had this conference earlier today and I'm speaking in front of my colleagues, and you get a little bit dehydrated, so you have to just think about drinking more water. But dry mouth can be a symptom, fatigue, just frequent breakdown of the immune system. So I kind of notice it with you guys a little bit as we get into the crunch times of the semester. More people are getting sick or missing class because they don't feel well. I think we get some of that weighing on us, and our immune system just can't recover from it. Headaches, if you struggle with migraines or just frequent headaches, sometimes stress can be a trigger. High blood pressure, again, racing heart, sweating when you get nervous. Cognitive would just be a little bit of disorientation. Like, I can't even think straight. I'm just so stressed out. I just feel distracted, can't concentrate, negative self-talk. Like, oh my God, I'm going to fail this if I don't study longer, if I have to take my exam tomorrow. Poor judgment. So again, you might do like a trigger response, like you just do something spontaneous, just like, I just got to get out of this stress mode. And then that could lead to some poor decisions, worrying. So those are all more brain related, cognitive related symptoms where you might start noticing those things, and then you can step back and be like, okay, what's causing this? What's the stressor? What's the event that's making me feel this way? And emotionally, anxiety, depression, just being on edge. Have you noticed yourself being like short with mom or dad or friends or boyfriend, girlfriend? Like maybe that could be also, hey, I'm so sorry. I don't know why I'm being so snappy right now. I feel like I have a lot going on. I'm stressed. So being aware of that's really important too when it comes to relationships. And then sometimes it can come out actual like behaviors, like just crying, like really emotional swings. Maybe you're not feeling the same appetite. Either you're craving more or you don't feel hungry at all. You could have disrupted sleep, which can then kind of snowball, as we know. Maybe problems communicating. You could be having some sexual problems, just where you're not as interested in that right now. Social isolation can be another symptom of that, where, hey, I just don't kind of want to talk to anybody right now. And I think this one's really important because I think this is a really common one. And I even have struggled with this in the past. It's like, I just don't want to talk about it. I'm just sick of thinking about it, sick of talking about it. But I think I always feel better when I'm just willing to get out and reach out to a friend, reach out to my therapist, reach out to my family, and just talk through it, have a sounding board. So I think this is one to really be mindful of if your tendency is to go internal, that sometimes the exact opposite is so helpful. And then I think substance use is another one. Sorry. Substance use is another one that can really kind of sneak up on us as just a coping mechanism that actually ends up probably aggravating it, because then you do the shame guilt game the next day of like, why did I do that? Now I feel worse, or now I didn't get my work done, or things like that can be compounding. So again, just knowing like the symptoms, how they're categorized, that there's not just physical symptoms, but things can be emotionally driven, they can be behavioral, they can be actual like physical body type symptoms that you're feeling. So the physical response, when we just look at that first category of the physical, the dry mouth, the beating heart, all that stuff that we talked about, the sweating, the upset stomach, these are typically related to the nervous system, which is our brain, our spinal cord, our nerves. And that's broken down a little further. So the the autonomic nervous system. This is the branch of our nervous system that controls our basic body processes. So it would be like, I'm going to reach and grab something out of the refrigerator. Like that's a voluntary act that requires a lot of nerves and brain function to say, I want this. I'm going to move my arm and grab and use sensation to pick up the milk bottle or the cheese or the cereal or whatever it is. That is voluntary function. And we also have involuntary function. So these are things like our digestive system, our heart beating, our lungs. We don't have to physically make those things work. They are working, and there are mechanisms and nerves and brain signals happening, but those are involuntary functions of the nervous system. Okay. So the parasympathetic division, that moderates things like slowing down our metabolism, restoring our energy supply. So recovery, when we sleep, when we rest our body, all of those things, that's parasympathetic. It's things that are reducing and relaxing our body, calming the body when a threat has come into play. And then the sympathetic division is what really responds to like danger situations. So it's very intuitive. We walk into a dark alley and we get a little tense and alert, or everything's kind of on high function. That's the sympathetic division. So that's responses to challenges or dangers. Could even be positive. Again, so you walk into the gym and you're about to lift something really heavy, you put more weight on the bar, or you're going to up the treadmill intensity, speed, like your body's going to go into a little bit of sympathetic, like, okay, I got to prepare myself for this. And even though the experience is going to be positive, it's still a challenge that you're responding to. So don't think of the sympathetic nervous system as always negative energy or negative responses. It's just something that's more challenging or potentially dangerous. Whereas the parasympathetic is where the body's trying to calm, help us digest, help us reset and relax, help our mind to calm. So those are just the different sections of that autonomic nervous system. It's not moving on for me. There we go. So the sympathetic nerves release neurotransmitters that affect every organ, sweat glands, blood vessels, and muscle. They all enable your body to handle these emergencies. So this sympathetic nervous system, as compared to the parasympathetic nervous system, these release neurotransmitters called norepinephrine, also could be called noradrenaline, but this is released by our sympathetic nervous system to specific tissues just to increase their function as they become more on alert if we go into a dangerous or stressful situation. So, for example, we get more sensory response when we get really cold, or if we're going into a high pressure situation. Again, we might sweat more. We feel like we have a little bit more sensitivity to anxiety, or situations where hearing people talking, or more alert around the room. So things are just on high alert. And that's that norepinephrine response. Just like somebody that's in the Secret Service, right? Like they're always just like, what's going on? Multisensory, everything is really high level in terms of their sensations. When this is released, that norepinephrine, it causes us to, again, have more alertness, have increased attention, increased awareness. And so in general, the sympathetic nervous system commands your body to stop storing energy and use it. So there's like lots of energy being expended there. So the endocrine system, this is where we talk about, if you've ever gone to an endocrinologist, right? These doctors look at our glands, our tissues, so like the lymphatic system and our sweat glands and our lymph nodes and all the cells that excrete hormones. So if you are maybe dealing with infertility later in life, or you have a parent or a brother, sister, aunt that's dealt with any kind of hormone imbalances, or looking to do some hormone replacement therapy through the menopause process, or have had to have a hysterectomy, they've probably gone to an endocrinologist, because they're going to look at how hormones are being metabolized and moved through the bloodstream, potentially processed and used by the body. So all that collective process of how and where hormones get released, whether from reproductive glands or from our pituitary glands in our brain, and then how they get moved and used through the blood, that's the endocrine system. And a hormone is like a little messenger. So our brain signals potentially to our ovaries or our testes to produce our reproductive hormones. Our pituitary gland might signal for us to release those leptin and ghrelin hormones we talked about with nutrition, like the fullness and hunger hormones. So those are other hormones. Cortisol is our stress hormone that also gets released from a messenger from the brain to say, hey, there's something going on here, a challenge ahead. Let's put that cortisol level on high alert. So hormones are just little messengers that signal different organs to release hormones, or to release different enzymes and get transported through the body. So the two systems are working together, endocrine system and the parasympathetic nervous system, sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system are all working together. So all that central nervous system and the little hierarchy we just talked about there. So central nervous system is the big umbrella, and we've got the sympathetic and parasympathetic systems within that. And then we've got the endocrine system, which is the hormones. So those are working together to kind of coordinate and combat physical symptoms and responses to stress. Cortisol, again, we just talked about, it's a hormone that's secreted by the cortex in the brain, and it from the adrenal glands, but it's initially signaled from the brain, because the brain has to perceive the stressor, and then it talks to the adrenal glands and says, hey, let's release this cortisol to help kind of fight off some of these physical responses or symptoms to stress. And then we just talked about the norepinephrine. Now, epinephrine is the hormone, and it's secreted by another layer of the adrenal glands. So the adrenal glands are very involved as well in the stress response. So again, there's a good visual in your book, but I think understanding, again, just how the communication channels are working. Like obviously your brain is the first layer because it has to perceive and actually encode and interpret what's happening, and then the brain is sending these signals to the various organs to help release these hormones and the adrenaline and epinephrine. So all these things are communicating together to help you put up a little bit of a barrier against these stresses. So the most instantaneous physical change, formerly we called it the fight, flight, or freeze reaction. So again, example, you walk into a dark alley, you have three choices, right? You see a shadow up ahead and you either fight, you either keep going and you're like, whatever's out there, I'm just going to push through this. I'm just going to approach it. That's your fight response. You're super confident. You feel well informed of the situation and the environment. The other is flight. You start walking, you see that shadow, or you see a snake down the path up ahead, and you're like, I am out. So that's your flight. So you got the fight it, you could flee or just that flight response, or you can freeze where you're just like, I don't know what to do. And you just feel paralyzed in that moment. And that is where what we used to call that fight, flight, or freeze was like the initial physical response to stress. The fight or flight reaction gives you heightened reflexes and strength, right? So you've got the strength either to turn and get your butt out of there, or you've got the strength to just push ahead and just be ready for whatever's coming for you. The freeze is just, again, that paralysis. And that is driven by a different neurotransmitter. The physical changes vary in intensity, but the same basic set of reactions occurs. So again, level of stress, right? If you're just like about to go meet somebody new for the first time or go on a blind date, you might have these like fight, flight, freeze type reactions, like, I can't go, I don't want to go, I'm so nervous. But it doesn't last as long. It's not as dramatic. Your life is not at risk, right? Versus potentially walking into a dangerous situation. But it's still, you have the same choice. I'm going to go, I'm going to see what happens. Or, you know what, I'm calling and canceling. I'm out of here. This isn't worth it. Or you just kind of feel paralyzed and you're like not sure if you want to answer the text, or you don't, or you're going to go, or I'm not going to go. Right. So you can see the level of intensity can vary, but the three potential choices or physical responses are the same. So again, this is that communication process. I'm not going to walk through this, but this would be a great thing. Again, you don't have to know all of it to understand the general chain of command where the stressor presents itself, who's communicating what, and what systems are involved there, right? The adrenal glands, the cortisol levels, the endocrine system, right? How all those are working together, and the central nervous system kind of playing quarterback there, because the central nervous system is the brain and the spinal cord and the nerves. So that's kind of running through everything. So how do we get back, right? We have this stressor, like we don't live there forever, again, unless there's something that you've been dealing with ongoing, but you probably have been working with a counselor on medications or things that you've just been battling for more than a isolated period of time. But after that stressful situation, so the dark alley, the snake in the woods, the blind date, you start to feel normal again. The parasympathetic, right? The one that relaxes us and brings us back. That takes command. It halts the stress response, tries to restore the systems to homeostasis, calms our heart rate, kind of dries out our sweaty palms. Your saliva glands start working again, breathing rate comes down. So homeostasis is kind of like equilibrium, back to our steady state, back to our normal way of living. So fight, flight, freeze is more of a survival mechanism. It's kind of part of how we've gone evolutionary through history, like as we kind of learned and our humans have adapted to various environments. Of course, we have a lot more safety methods now, and we have more modern technology and all the things, alarms on our houses, right? But this is still something that we have acquired over time from generations. And in modern life, it's often not that appropriate because many stressors don't require a physical response, right? But because the reaction prepares our body for physical action, regardless of whether it's necessary or appropriate. So again, I think people are a little overreactionary to more moderate forms of stress. Like we go into an exam and we have this anxiety response, this physical response. But I think it's a little bit, again, we tend to overreact. Our sympathetic nervous system is much more active than our parasympathetic, which is the calming. But we tend to just go immediately into fight, flight, or freeze, and then have to work ourselves back down instead of starting in a more moderate level of anxiety and stress and then seeing like what's necessary, like how much should I be worried about this situation. And I think that's personality too. Some people are kind of like worry warts, right, where everything's kind of a bigger deal, and then other people are like, well, let's see what happens. So I think too, just understanding your personality needs is really important, because then you can kind of prepare yourself mentally for that situation and put some buffers around you. Like maybe you do some proactive journaling, or you go ahead and meet with a counselor or therapist before a big event to kind of get some good coping mechanisms and techniques. So cognitive appraisal is real. Again, this is that kind of thinking ahead piece, right? You're kind of appraising, like, what are all the possible situations, right? Like this may be like my person. If I go on this blind date, like this could be it. This could be really exciting and fun. That's a one cognitive appraisal of that. The other is like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to use my emergency text friend to come save me. This is going to be the worst night of my life. I'm not have anything to talk to them about. It's going to be really awkward. I hate eating in front of people, and this is just going to be really stupid. Like that's the other cognitive appraisal, right? So you get to choose because you haven't been in it yet. You're like projecting what might happen. This is that what if mentality, right? You can have a successful prediction, right? So two factors can kind of reduce the magnitude of the stress response. So if you have a successful prediction, then what you expected happens, then you're probably not going to be that surprised, right? So that's one way. And then also your perception of control over the situation, right? So if you're there and you do kind of have a plan B and you're like, hey, I'm going to go, but if I'm not having fun, so-and-so is going to call me at 7:30 and I'm going to have a way out. So then you have some control over that situation. So I think going in and assessing that cognitive appraisal and then putting some pieces in place that say like, okay, I'm going to have some backup plans if things don't go the way I expected them to go. So this is just a nice little graph of like how things can escalate and when those symptoms start to kind of turn south and become more detrimental. So on that x-axis, you can see the indicator, right? Like there's not enough stress, and then on the other side is this just total distress and burnout, and that y-axis is the low stress to high stress. So as stress increases, you can see over time that the longer it lingers and the more intense it becomes, then that leads to more detrimental outcomes. So we have, low stress, and, we kind of get bored, right? So like the activation of our mind, and there's not a lot of arousal happening. There's nothing crazy going on for us to kind of feel challenged by. So, that is like low performance and not a lot of stress. We just feel bored. And then as that stress, the amount of stress increases and the arousal kind of increases, well, we're kind of like not that motivated. And all of a sudden we have some increased interest and focus, and we're highly motivated at the peak there. So you see that green turning to yellow. That's like optimal stress levels. Like everything's at a high. You're feeling really motivated. You can deal with the amount of stress. It's not too much. And then you can see as you come across that into the yellow and red, it's just like you just can't deal. The ability to deal, your performance levels start to decline on the other side. because everything's increasing on the stress spectrum. So just kind of understand that like ebb and flow of like you want something to challenge you, you want something to kind of push performance levels and nudge you along, but then you want to find your sweet spot. All right. So effective and ineffective responses, although our responses are kind of determined by personality, like I was talking about, we do want to have some effective behavioral responses, talking, laughing, exercising, meditating, learning time management skills. These are just good coping mechanisms and techniques, structures and strategies we can put into place. So we just can't sit there and be like, I'm stressed. Like, I'm stressed. I'm just going to hole up in my room and be stressed. And this is just normal. I mean, yes, it's normal, but there's techniques to help you. It's like if you're not putting yourself in a position to deal with it effectively, then it is going to escalate. Then it is going to become chronic. Then you are going to find yourself dealing with all the symptoms of it. But there are tools and techniques and strategies to help you. So taking advantage of those is super important. Ineffective responses would include emotional eating, just expressing overly aggressive or hostile behaviors, using substances, tobacco, alcohol, other drugs just to cope. And I think those can be more detrimental behaviors. So here's just that personality and stress relationship. Personality as a whole, defined as behavioral, cognitive, emotional tendencies. So some people are more introverted, some people more extroverted, some people tend to be more low key, resilient. Some people, again, are kind of worrywart. So if we look at just how we were wired, and we all have those, it's genetics, it's how you were brought up, it's maybe how you what you dealt with in your childhood, if you had any kind of trauma or you had really overbearing parents, like that can all affect. Some people's personality traits just enable them to deal with stress a little bit more successfully. And we can learn from those people. I'm sure we have friends that are like that, family members that are like that. So being aware of that too, and just seeing like, how do they deal with final exams, or how's my roommate like dealing with her friendships or relationships or all the things. Like, it's really nice to just be aware of the people around you. But hardiness is optimistic, allows people to see their lives as in their control. They can deal with stressors more easily and opportunities to see these situations as learning versus detrimental. And resilience just tends to allow people to accept reality and just hold on to the belief that life is meaningful and there's a purpose for this. And even if it's a struggle, I can get stronger through the struggle, or this pain is going to become my purpose. So just a little bit more of a open-minded worldview. So people in Gen Z, that's probably most of you born between 97 and 2015, just greater responses over common stressors. Gen Z teens and adults are facing more uncertainties, experiencing more depression, negative health impacts. And then despite the recognition, I think people are much more aware of their mental health challenges, but they're also being diagnosed with more mental disorders, actually nearly twice as unlikely to seek treatment as compared to millennials. And, maybe we can talk a little bit about this, why you guys think that is. So, because I think that is interesting. These are just some precursors or factors. So gender can affect how we deal with stress. Men and women just have different approaches to and abilities to deal with stress. And I think that's also situational. Like, I think men deal with stress better in certain situations, financial stress or job stress or relationship stress, where women and maybe a little bit more emotional with relationships, friendship disputes or drama, families and kiddos, things like that. And again, that's a very generalized, but I think you can kind of look at that as a way to understand that there can be gender differences depending on the situation, and also cultural differences, just in your upbringing, probably where you grew up. There's certain parts of the country that maybe deal with more crime, or parts of different cities that are a little bit more of a challenge with the access they have to things, or things that are more prevalent in those areas, crime, or robbery, or just personal situations. So I think too, just dealing with and understanding that people come from different places. I think the other thing is that just past experience, like we become more resilient every time we face something. So every time we face something, we learn a little bit and we position ourselves next time to deal with that better or differently. If it went well, we can also learn, like, okay, I'm going to study like that again. I felt really good about that test. Or I've had some folks email, like, I didn't do as well as I thought. And we talk through it, like, these are some ways that maybe you can do better next time. And you can see what you missed. And okay, I see where I read that wrong, or I misinterpreted what you were asking, or I second guessed myself. So I think every time you find yourself in an experience and learn from it, then you become more effective at dealing with it the next time. So the stress experience as a whole, it's a physical, emotional, cognitive. It's unfortunately, it just affects everything depending on the intensity of that stressor. And the more intense emotional response, the more the physical response, right? So the more anxious we become, the more of those physical symptoms we feel, or the more depressed we become, the more of those physical symptoms we really feel. So I think understanding that correlation and being able to mentally and emotionally deal will exacerbate, or will reduce some of those physical symptoms as well. All right, I'm going to stop there because I know it's probably hard to listen to like much longer, but I'll try to record another little section and then we'll get through the rest of this when I see you guys on Wednesday. Or if you're watching this after Wednesday, then I will record the second half of this for you guys as well. All right, see ya soon.